All right, you guys, welcome back to another episode of the Rebranded Athlete Podcast. I know things are a little bit different today. We're a little bit later, but hopefully some of you can join us today since it's a little bit more into the evening. I am really excited about the guest today. She's somebody who I've been following since I first got into the athlete transition space, but as things would have it, we've just never had the opportunity to connect until today. So you guys are actually going to see our first conversation together prior to the chat before getting started. But my guest today is Katie Spada, and she's a former athlete turned dietitian and entrepreneur who's focused on helping athletes and former athletes develop a healthy relationship with food and their body image. Definitely something I could have used as I was transitioning out. Through utilizing an intuitive eating platform, her goal is to help athletes and former athletes find peace and confidence with food and their body while navigating the changes that come with transitioning out of sport. And Katie, welcome to the Rebranded Athlete Podcast. So excited to have you. How are you doing today?
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I am doing really well, and I'm very excited to be on the Rebranded Athlete Podcast and to have this conversation.
Oh, that's awesome. It's been a long time coming. You just didn't know it. So you've been on my list, and I was like, you know what? Now is a great time to go for it.
I love it. I'm super pumped to be here.
Yeah, I've been, just seeing all the work that you've been putting in the last couple of years and all your reels and just, everything that you've done to really bring awareness to this subject that isn't talked about a lot. And even for myself, like as I went through college athletics, like I laugh now, with my teammates and friends who had gone through athletics, but it's like, man, even how we used to eat when we were competing then because we didn't know any better, and the knowledge we have now, how much more of a competitive athlete we could have been if we would have listened.
Oh my gosh. I'm always saying if I just would have known what I know now, how much better could I have been when I was competing? But hindsight is always 2020. And so I'm excited to now be able to share the knowledge and everything that I've learned since becoming a dietitian and pursuing my career.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know we're going to get into your story here and everything that you do, but let's start with your sport. What did you compete in? Where did you go? And then let's go from there.
Yes, so I was a synchronized swimmer. It's now called artistic swimming, so you might see that if you yes. They changed the name on us, but I was a synchronized swimmer, and I competed for The Ohio State University. Had to drop that in there.
Of course. Yep. It's a big thing. And you got to make sure you put the in front of it. I've learned
Great.
that.
Yes, in all caps.
Yeah. Yeah. Lots of school pride. That's great.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what age did you start? Or actually, let's see. How did you end up in the pool for the first time? Do you remember that?
So the first time in the pool was really just like a water safety class that my parents wanted me to be in before I can even remember. But I fell in love with the pool. And so they kept putting me in swim classes, and I just really excelled through the levels pretty quickly. Water was just where I was most comfortable. So I feel like I've been a swimmer since it was safe enough for me to be in a pool.
That's a true water baby at that, right?
Yes, exactly. True water baby.
Yeah, that's great. And then as far as like competing in the water, was there anybody you looked up to? Like, how did that even come about for you, that opportunity?
Yeah, so I was a speed swimmer. So I did speed swimming first, and then I saw synchronized swimming on TV in the Olympics actually, and I was like, I want to do that. But we didn't have any teams in the area that we were living in at the time. And so when we moved out to, now I'm in Las Vegas, we moved out to Las Vegas. My mom actually saw an ad in the newspaper for a team that was having like an open tryout. And so I was like, can I go? And we grabbed a swim bag and went down to the pool. And then 11 years later, I was retiring. So it just really all fell into play. And I just fell in love with the sport from the first walk-on practice that I had.
Wow, that's amazing. And I know there's so much that goes into that sport, with just the synchronization, everybody having to be on cue. So it must really be a team-like environment because you guys all have to work together, right?
Yes. We say, of course, so many sports are very team focused. We like to say it's the ultimate team sport because if we have one misstep, could be disastrous. So there's a lot of trust. There's a lot of connection with your teammates and being able to, know where they're at and move based on that. So it's a fun sport.
Yeah, that's cool. I'm sure lots of holding your breath under the water as well.
Yes, I I always joke. I'm like, well, you know what? At least now I can breathe whenever I want. So
Yeah, right, and not on somebody else's watch, right?
exactly,
Oh,
exactly.
oh man. So, after you left, at the Ohio State University, were there any other opportunities for you to take it any further, or did you know that your career at that point was coming to an end?
So I knew my career was coming to an end. The potential opportunities for post collegiate synchronized swimming were either resuming the elite track. So I had been on a couple of national teams before I opted for the college route. I could go back to national team competition if I wanted to, or the kind of professional aspect of synchronized swimming would be the shows here in Las Vegas. So a lot of the Cirque du Soleil shows have synchronized swimmers in them. But neither of those routes were really something that I wanted to pursue. I actually ended up pretty burned out from my sport. And so I was ready to have that end to that chapter by the time I was a senior in college.
Right. My story is very similar too. I was that extra fifth year senior. So by the time I had, come to that point, and I also knew that, it was either to go overseas and play or play beach, and just my body just wasn't cooperating with me. Probably the food I was eating.
Could be.
Could have been the food. But yeah, very similar. And it's so interesting as athletes, like when we know it's time, to pivot and focus on something else. I don't know about your experience, but for me, I felt very disconnected to, number one, who I was, because I didn't know who Sarah was without her sport, and number two, who my next like circle and community was going to be, because I'm sure it's similar with you with swimming. Like our volleyball team was very tight knit, and so it's like when I didn't have that anymore, it's like, okay, who do I lean into now?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really a lot of questions that come up because you have this built-in safety net for so long with your team.
Right.
And so, I knew that I would be retiring. I was ready for that next phase, but there still was a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, a lot of questions that left me just kind of struggling with the ambiguity of things. Being a synchronized swimmer, I like everything planned out, structure. I know my next move. So to not really know the next move was scary.
Hmm. So how did your time as the swimmer lead to the work that you're doing now?
Oh my goodness, yes. Okay. I might go off on this, but I'm gonna
No, please. Yep.
so in the sport of synchronized swimming, there is a very prominent aesthetic component. We're looking at leg length, leg size, body size, and in as with trends just in like normal culture, there's trends in desired bodies in synchronized swimming. And so the era in which I was swimming was more of a tall, thin, long leg era. And my body did not really meet that standard that they were looking for. So I was constantly being told that I would make it depending on if I changed my body or if the look they were after changed. So where that kind of landed me as an athlete was trying to do everything I could to manipulate my body to meet this mold. It really was less, yes, I was focused on my performance, but I was constantly chasing this physical appearance. And that led me down some really unhealthy nutrition behaviors and exercise behaviors, not because I was intentionally trying to do things that were disordered or unhealthy,
Mhm.
but because I thought that was what I needed to do in order to excel in my sport. And so I decided to become a dietitian for several reasons, but one of them was because I was like, I want to crack the code to figure out how to be skinny the rest of my life. That was
Right.
what I thought becoming a dietitian would be. And a couple of years into my career, I was still struggling with my own personal nutrition and body image and feeling a little bit like a failure because I have these credentials now. I'm a registered dietitian. I'm supposed to teach people how to be healthy with food. And I felt like I was still struggling so much. And I found intuitive eating and started learning more about that, digging into the research behind it, started practicing it in my own life. And pretty quickly, I realized that this was an incredible platform and an incredible framework for former athletes to transition their nutrition. because all of those disordered habits that I had picked up while I was competing followed me into life after sport.
Mhm.
I always thought, oh, well, once there's no longer pressure to like have to meet the synchro look, I'll be good. But that was far from the truth. And so I started learning that a lot of my teammates had similar struggles and then started talking about it more, and it kind of just fell all into place.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things that just isn't talked about enough. It's swept underneath the rug, like even when competing. So even kind of going back to what you're saying about like the body image, obviously you guys are in, swimsuits, which is different than I'll use a volleyball example, a volleyball uniform. But then at the same time, there's still, certain images, right, that we want to hold. And I still remember even us like having to, do body composition, like the weigh-ins, body fat percentages, underwater weighing, like all of these things. And I remember some of my teammates, like, they'd be doing cleanses and all kinds of things because we knew that this was up and coming, because we didn't want to be in this certain category with the coaches, because then we knew we'd have to put in more time, after we've already done our 3.5 hour practice, get on the bike and continue to burn those calories. Like, very,
Yes.
very, very different thinking, when you really think about the full picture of the human element of the person, and really just focusing on like the vessel, and not completing the mind to body connection with food.
Right.
Hmm.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, that brings up such an important topic with like the body composition factor in sports. So often it's used as a metric of success or to determine how an athlete is doing without taking into account all the other factors like, well, how is their performance actually? Are they able to have stamina during a game, during a competition, during practice? Are they performing well? Are they sleeping well? And we just fixate on this number, and it really can create obsession in an unhealthy way without looking at, well, how is the athlete actually doing?
Hmm.
Um,
Exactly.
so yeah, I remember, it was kind of that like unspoken um, acknowledgement. We all knew it was happening, but no one talked about it. Where whenever we would have our weigh and pinch days, is what we called them. 'Cause
Yes. Yep. That
now
man, that thing would just, especially under
hurt.
the arm, right? Yeah, we'd all have bruises from that.
So painful, and it's actually very inaccurate. When I learned about when I learned about it, I'm like, "Oh, the margin of error on this is
Right.
really."
It depends on the pincher, right?
Yes, yes. But I remember we used to have girls who would run to the bathroom because they
Mhm.
were trying to make themselves lighter, and if they ate breakfast, if they didn't, and it just really fostered such an unhealthy environment, but yet we all just accepted it as, well, this is what it is. This is what it takes to be elite. Uh,
Right. And really, those numbers, when you think about it, don't really matter as you're competing, because it's really about how you feel, the amount of energy you have. And for me, I always had like, I was very fortunate. I had a very fast metabolism. I also sweat a lot when I was playing. I was actually a case study for Gatorade.
Oh my gosh, that's
Yes,
so cool.
when I was playing, because I would lose so much sweat. So in 45 minutes, they had, observed me one time. I lost 3 pounds of body weight in 45 minutes because I would sweat so much. So my electrolytes were all off. I had to take salt tablets, all kinds of stuff, you name it. I don't
Yep.
sweat like that anymore. But but then so I remember my body fat percentage, I think, was like 14% when I actually did the underwater weighing, which is, pretty low for a female. But if you take a look at my nutrition and what I was eating, I mean, it's like Taco Bell, Del Taco, like all these things that weren't even really serving me. So even to have like that low number and like be praised by the coaches, it really doesn't have that full picture of what's really going on with the athlete, you know? Yeah.
Exactly. There's not always that correlation with the numbers and the statistics we're getting from those measurements and our nutrition intake and appropriately fueling our bodies.
Mhm. Yes. Yeah.
Um, yeah, that's so interesting about the Gatorade. That's really
Oh,
cool.
yeah. Yeah, they had given me actually some stuff. It was called Gator Light, and I think it's actually on the market now. It took them a long time to get it out. But they were having me sample all that type of stuff, and they wanted to fly me out to Florida, and I was just, it was my last year. I was like, I'm good.
You're
I don't
okay.
wanna be a guinea pig.
Seriously,
So
seriously.
with all that. So Yeah. And then let's talk a little bit about the transition out. So, how was your transition like going from being in that competitive mindset, especially with body image, everything, to then being on your own terms? And what was your relationship like with food then at that point?
Oh, my relationship with food was so, tumultuous and very, very disordered. I was very much in the burn to earn mentality where, well, if I
Mm,
work out enough, like, I can compensate for foods that I'm eating. And so if I didn't have a workout scheduled, I felt like I needed to eat less, which usually ended in binging later on.
right.
And so then I would try and work out or get my steps in, or I remember doing crunches at 10 p.m. Then, before my internship because I was like, "Oh my gosh, I had 3 cookies, I need to burn this off."
Hmm.
And so that put a lot of strain on my metabolism, my mental health, and it just kind of drove me to feeling like I was constantly fixated and frustrated with food, my body, what the scale was saying, feeling like I could never do enough exercise. And I really think a lot of that mentality was attached to the like food is fuel
Hmm.
thoughts.
Right.
Yes, we know food is fuel, but when we put it as that, like food is fuel for workouts, it kind of becomes hard to eat food when you're not working out. Like, well, now
Right.
how do I justify it? Um, so I found myself in a tailspin of constantly trying to justify eating, to restrict, and then I would overeat, and the cycle just negatively impacted me for the first, I'd say, like year and a half
Mhm.
post sport to try and just figure it out.
Yeah, I think that's pretty typical, like that first year and a half for everybody to kind of, figure out, okay, I can't like even for me, I mean, I used to eat a lot because I was burning calories all the time. And then all of a sudden it's like that stops and it's like how do you then like manage, like a normal eating session, because usually you could just eat whatever you want because yeah, well, I'm going to work out tomorrow and it's going to be 3 hours, so, I can burn it off. But not when you're not competing anymore.
Exactly, and there was actually a qualitative study, I think it had a couple of quantitative measures as well, but it was talking about essentially the athlete has to go through a recalibration period. That's
Mm,
what they
mhm.
titled it. It's this recalibration period because now your hunger hormones are gonna be different, your physical cues of hunger and fullness are gonna be different. A lot of the times, athletes are not in tune with hunger and fullness cues, they're just eating
Right.
to meet the energy demands,
Mhm.
and so when they retire, they're used to just eating what's in front of them to meet energy demands that are no longer there. And so we really have to cultivate the tools to learn how to understand your hunger, how to understand fullness, how to build an optimized plate to support health, not just competing, because those plates do look different.
Absolutely. And definitely like honoring that fullness piece, I think is huge too, because that really takes a lot of like intuition and really getting to know yourself. And we don't,
Yes.
a lot of us don't spend that time. We just eat until we regret it later on.
Right, right. And
Yeah.
I think we're just so used to like recognizing those big, loud signs like, "Oh, I'm so full," like, "Now I'm
Right.
overly full," or "I'm so hungry." And one thing I really like to do with my clients is teach them about the subtle cues. So that way you recognize like, "Oh, I'm starting to get hungry. I'm gonna eat so I don't get to the ravenous stage," or like, "I'm starting to get full. I'm gonna slow down and give myself the opportunity to actually stop when I'm satiated." Because so often we're like, "Well, yeah, I know hunger, I know fullness," but we know the extremes of it. We don't
Right.
know those subtle pieces.
Exactly. And also like with the busy lifestyle of athletes, like eating on the go. I remember like grabbing a sandwich and like eating on my way to practice as I'm walking, like all these habits that are, now we know better, but it's still hard to break. Like even when I was a school site principal, because I would hardly get any time to even just like have a snack during the day. And I was just so busy and I would just wolf things down. And it was very similar to when I was as an athlete as well too, just getting it in whenever you can.
Yep. Yes, and I think a lot of athletes do move into a lifestyle that is similar to our
Mhm.
competition lifestyle, fast-paced, very busy, lots of things going on, and so, yeah, figuring out those tools and, ways that you can implement appropriate nourishment throughout the day. I always like to say we want your nutrition to fit your lifestyle. You don't necessarily have to change your lifestyle to fit your nutrition, but making sure that we're doing that in a way that is health supportive and also sustainable. It has
Mhm.
to be sustainable.
Exactly. So if I'm an athlete transitioning out and I'm recognizing that, these are not good habits and things I'm developing, what would you say is like the first step I would need to take?
The first step would be making sure that you're having all three macronutrients at your meals: carbohydrates, protein, fat. And that is from a physiological standpoint. We want to give ourselves the opportunity to start to recognize hunger and fullness cues. And if we're not adequately nourishing ourselves, we miss that opportunity. So I feel like in sports, we are constantly pushed with like protein, 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 and then carbs to like carb load, and we don't truly understand the importance of having carbs, fats, and proteins at all of your meals. So taking a look at your plate and seeing if there's a way that you can either change out or increase your carbs or your protein or add fat in, so you can start to optimize and set up physiologically the ability to start to recalibrate your mindset around food and how you approach it.
Right, and it's having that balance with those nutrients in your body, and I think that's when people don't feel well, it's because things are off, right? Something's not balanced. So having more balanced meals is definitely going to lead to feeling better. Yeah.
Yes, yes. I think we totally overlook the importance of eating for blood sugar management.
Mhm.
That's just for everyone across the board. And when you do eat meals that have carbs, fats, and proteins, and you're not going 6, 7 hours without eating, you feel a whole lot better and you're able to make decisions about food or otherwise, um, in a more controlled way, not so spastic or feeling chaotic.
Mhm. And I heard you talk a lot about intuitive eating, so I wanna dive into that a little bit. So what is it, and how do we get to that point where we're leaning in on t our t intuition?
Yes, intuitive eating is a framework and an approach to eating that was developed by two registered dietitians. And it really reconnects the brain with your body. So it's like meshing your brain knowledge and your physical knowledge, to eat in a way that is enjoyable, nourishing, and it's really without restriction. So a lot of typical diets have like set restrictions, and the goal is to eliminate those restrictions and allow your body and your brain knowledge to, um, I don't want to use the word dictate, but kind of determine how you're eating. So there's 10 principles that support the intuitive eating framework, and some of the most notable are like honor your hunger, feel your fullness. But some of the other really important ones are rejecting the diet mentality, and especially as athletes, whether we recognize it or not, there's a lot of diet talk and diet culture in our sports, and so we have to really recognize that before we're able to move forward with this framework. Um, the other piece that is often forgotten, which is the last principle, is gentle nutrition or honoring your health. And so it's not a complete disregard for nutrition. We actually want to bring in nutrition that is supportive of your health, but doing so without it being so rigid that you're driving yourself to binging. Um, what the research really shows us is that restriction almost always leads to overconsumption.
Mhm.
And so allowing yourself to have that permission can feel really scary at first. But it's a necessary step in order to feel like you can say no to cookies whenever you want. So I like to say intuitive eating is giving you back the choice on how to build your plate. Um, and if someone's new to intuitive eating, sometimes we do start a little bit more structured because it can feel really scary to just be like, I'm just going to listen to my hunger and fullness when you're like, well, what does that feel like? What is that?
Right.
Um, so sometimes we start structured and then slowly move towards incorporating more intuition to make decisions before you're able to just be like, yeah, you know what? I want ice cream today. And you can have 2 bites of it and put it back in the fridge or the freezer. I never thought that would be a possibility. And we have like 5 pints in our freezer right now that I haven't touched because I just don't feel like it. And that's also very weird.
And that's great though, because you are allowing that space for yourself, to be able to do that. I went on my own fitness journey the last couple of years too. I'm actually vegan. I don't think I told you that as well.
Oh, okay. Love that.
Yeah, in the
Hey,
last in the last 5 years, and so my whole eating was out of whack because when I first went vegan, I had the mentality that I could just eat whatever because it's vegan food, right? No,
yep.
not not even, those pounds caught up to me, and so, I hired a coach, Scott Burgett, he's, big time on Instagram, but I worked with him, and we got to the point with intuitive eating as well, and
Mhm.
so powerful because then you can make these choices for yourself, and there's none of this restriction, like you're talking about. Like, I know I can still continue to have my favorite foods as
Yeah.
long as it fits within, like, my plan for the day. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It really just puts the power back in your hands. And I think, a lot of the times people think like, oh, if I just give myself permission to eat whatever I want, I'll constantly be eating cookies, cake, and pizza. And
Mhm.
um, you know, uh, you might think, and I thought that was going to be the case. But oddly enough, when you reach this place of finding the ability to have gentle nutrition, which it sounds like you're at this
Mhm.
place, I genuinely wanna eat fruits and vegetables, like, I
Right,
genuinely want to consume foods that make me feel good and still have, a Christmas cookie or ice cream or whatever it is,
right.
but it just feels so easy, and I feel like food should feel easy, and so many people find food really hard.
Right, and it's so interesting when our bodies do then begin to crave, like, the good foods, right? It's so interesting.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm always astounded when I'm like, "I just really want, like, a salad," or, "I really just want some veggies," and it still is not lost on me how cool that is.
Yeah, it really is. It's a transformation in itself, and I mean, if you look at Katie, like, from the pool the last time in college to now, like, how far you've come and the fact that you're now educating people and working with people and changing lives, like, just having this amount of knowledge is fantastic.
It's really surreal to think about because I never saw myself taking this path, and I think that's one of the exciting things for, athletes who may not know where their life's gonna go. You don't have to know. I didn't think this is where my career path was gonna take me or my nutrition or anything would take me, and, it all works out how it's supposed to.
It does, it does. Yep, you're on your path, which is
Yes,
great. Yep.
exactly.
So thinking about the life lessons, I just wanna hit on this a little bit. Anything from the pool that has helped you with what you do today as far as maybe a life lesson or a skill set that you've learned from being an athlete?
I really think persistence, continuing to do it. I remember, I'm sure as many coaches, my coach was like, again, again, again. And being able to put in those reps, whether it is in a physical sense from, sport or in career or just in life, that builds resiliency, that builds the ability to stay persistent. And I really think that that yields success in however you define success.
Mhm.
I think that might be something that I've taken from sport and have changed as well is how I define success. Success was always winning, being number one, national titles, all of that. And, in life after sport, we may not be chasing titles and gold medals and trophies. And so for so long, I was chasing like a promotion or a pay raise or, this or that. And being able to really redefine what success is in my life, I think is one of the biggest freedoms outside of food freedom. Um, and that has been really cool as well.
Yeah, that's so powerful because success really does look different, I think, in life after sports. And we continue to chase things because that's the mindset that we've had. But there comes a time when we learn that, it is about setting up what we define as success for each person. So what you have for success, people listening, like everybody's is different, but as long as you know what it feels like to you, then yeah, that's very powerful. So your sport gave a lot to you, even though
It
yeah,
did. There was so much purpose in my career for sure.
yeah. I couldn't imagine life without, being involved in athletics. It's just we had the best place to be able to learn life lessons. Yeah.
We We really did. It was kind of like a safe place to really learn those life lessons and be able to implement them now. Yeah, and I am, even though I got burned out at the end of my career, without synchronized swimming, I would not have been on this path. And so, yeah, like we said, it all works out.
Yep, the way it's supposed to.
Yes.
Yeah, so I know you have a lot of things going right now. I pretty sure I saw you have like an academy and maybe some other offerings, but you want to talk about what you got going on right now for our listeners?
Sure, sure. So, the biggest thing that I'm doing right now is the Fueled Former Athlete Academy, and that is a self-paced course with live coaching support that really teaches you how to do exactly what we've been talking about, transition your nutrition in life after sport. So you can go from eating for athlete life to eating for everyday life. And be able to do so, like we were talking about, without restriction, without feeling like you're being controlled by food. And so there's a lot of intuitive eating pillars that are worked into that. I do have a one-to-one coaching service as well, which currently has a wait list. And then I also have an ebook.
Nice. Yeah.
And the ebook walks through my 5-pillar approach to eating in life after sport. And so just different ways to kind of learn a little bit more about what it looks like to transition your life, your nutrition in life after sport. And then last kind of personal plug is I created a merchandise line for former
Oh,
athletes.
nice. Yeah,
Yes.
great.
Thank you. It's the Fueled line. So I love all of the merch has fueled on it. And the purpose of that is, yes, we want to be fueled physically, but I also want to fuel very full lives in life after sport. So connection, emotionally, physically, relationships. So fueled is just something that is really powerful to me. And so we created a merchandise line for it.
Oh, that's fantastic. Lots of great things. And I know even for myself, like putting my health first and putting me first has allowed me to, give back and be able to serve people on a higher level because I'm my best. So making that investment in yourself, I think is the most priceless thing you can do. Yeah.
Totally
Yeah.
agree. Really being able to show up for others has to start with you putting yourself and your health first.
Yeah, yeah, and plus you feel good, like there's nothing better than, being able to go to the freezer and go get that, tub of ice cream and take 2 bites and then know that, you're satisfied and that's all you needed.
It's it's mind-blowing. Anyone listening that's like, there's no way I destroy the whole pint all the time. Like, I used to be the same way. I promise there is a way to get to this place. And it's such a beautiful place to be.
Yeah, that's great. And if people want to connect with you, where's the best place for
Best place,
social media? Probably.
yes. Instagram at fueling.former.athletes. I am on Instagram most often. You can also take a look at my website, spadastrongnnutrition.com. That's my business name. And so those would probably be the best 2 places to reach me.
Nice. I'll make sure we put those in the show notes afterwards for you guys as well. Katie, I have one final question. I asked all my guests this season before we wrap up, but what's something surprising you've learned about yourself since you left the game?
Oh, something surprising I've learned about myself since I left the game. This is a really good question.
I stump everybody on this one.
Yes, I love this question. I think the thing that I've learned about myself is, we'll see if this answers your question, but I really allowed myself to absorb other people's opinions of what I am and who I am and what my identity should look like. And so in life after sport and leaving the game, I feel like I've really learned what Katie wants and what it looks like for Katie to live authentically for herself. And that took a lot of time. But it's not the same way that I used to want to think my life should look. So I guess I really gave myself the opportunity to explore, which I didn't think I would. I figured I would stay on a certain track and just follow it. And so I learned how to explore and be open to different pathways.
That's great. And I'm sure so many opportunities have come up for you. And then the openness to even more in your life too, because you're just getting started. You haven't been out that long either. So you're just getting warmed up.
We're just kicking it off.
This is the preseason.
Exactly. Yes.
Oh man. Well, Katie, thank you so much. I know this has been a long time coming with our conversation, but so much wisdom and knowledge. And I wish we had more time to even dive deeper, but that just means I'll have to have you back on for another time later on to get deeper into nutrition.
I would love to. This has been an awesome conversation, and I really appreciate you having me on, Sarah.
And anytime, anytime. All right, you guys, thank you so much for joining this week. We'll catch you next time on the Rebranded Athlete podcast. Take care.